The rain never stopped on Kersh. It fell in silver sheets from a sky of swirling violet clouds, coating the jungle world in endless dampness. Towers of bioluminescent trees rose hundreds of meters into the air, their glowing branches forming a living canopy. Strange winged creatures flitted between them, their calls echoing like distant bells. On the ground below, mud roads snaked through clustered alien buildings, domes of chitin, glass, and metal, built where no human city could ever stand. And in one of those cities, hidden among them like a ghost, lived Eli Mercer. He wiped the oil from his hands as the transport engine hummed back to life. The vessel was a Varan cargo hauler alien tech, smooth and elegant, but its engine was failing and no Varan mechanic knew why. Eli knew. He always knew. "Try it now," he called over the noise. The Varan pilot, a tall insectoid with translucent wings, touched the console. The engine purred like a satisfied animal. "Perfect," the pilot said, his mandibles clicking in gratitude. "You humans have a way with machines." Eli shrugged, grabbing his worn jacket. "We like solving problems, keeps us busy." He stepped outside into the rain, letting the cool water wash the grease from his skin. Above him, the orbital skyways were crowded with ships, traders, patrol vessels, refugee transports. Kersh was a hub world for the Galactic Defense Coalition, a place where dozens of species mingled, traded, and argued under the promise of peace. Eli didn't belong here, not really, but after what he'd done after the war, there weren't many places left where he did. He walked the narrow streets of Vea Prime, the colony's largest settlement, where alien languages mixed in the air like a song. Merchants shouted in tongues he'd never learned. Drones zipped overhead, delivering food and supplies. Children of a dozen species played in the rain. Peace, 300 years of it. Humanity had learned to trade instead of conquer, explore instead of fight. And Eli was supposed to be part of that future, a simple mechanic on a distant world, far from the scars of his past. He turned a corner and found T-Vala waiting for him. She was young, maybe in her early 20s by human reckoning, with soft blue skin and 4 delicate eyes that glowed faintly in the rain. A Varan scientist, brilliant and curious, she befriended Eli when no one else on Kersh had dared. "Still hiding from the world, Eli?" she asked with a teasing smile. "Not hiding," he said, pulling up his hood. "Just keeping my head down." T-Vala's eyes narrowed. "You always say that, but you're not like the others. You think I don't see it." Eli sighed. "I fix ships, that's all I do." "No," she said gently. "That's all you let yourself do." They walked together through the crowded marketplace. The smell of roasted spire fruit and ionized metal filled the air. Rain hissed off neon signs. Everything seemed normal until the alarms began to wail. The crowd froze. Holograms flickered to life above the streets, showing the stern face of Admiral Kithra, the GDC commander on Kersh. "All citizens remain calm," her voice boomed through the speakers. "Our patrol fleet has engaged an unknown hostile force in Sector 11. All non-essential traffic is suspended. Civilian shelters are being prepared." "Hostile force," T-Vala whispered. "That's impossible, the frontier's secure." "Not anymore," Eli muttered. The hologram changed. A star map appeared, dotted with red markers moving toward Kersh. "The enemy is identified as the Zorak Dominion," Kithra continued. "We believe this is a probing force. The coalition will respond decisively. There is no cause for alarm." But there was, Eli could see it in the faces of the crowd, the fear. The Zorak were not pirates or raiders. They were conquerors. Worlds they touched rarely survived. A merchant shouted, "The GDC will protect us," but his voice sounded hollow. T-Vala turned to Eli. "You've heard of them." "Yes," Eli said quietly. "I've fought them." She blinked. "You fought?" He hadn't meant to say that. He hadn't spoken of the war in years. But old memories rose like ghosts, cities burning, soldiers screaming, the ground shaking beneath orbital bombardments. "That was a long time ago," he said, "before humanity changed." The shelters filled quickly. Families rushed underground. GDC soldiers marched through the streets, their polished armor gleaming under the rain. But Eli saw their faces, nervous, uncertain. They were peacekeepers, not warriors. They'd never fought a real war. And deep down, he knew they wouldn't be ready. At sunset, T-Vala found him sitting outside his small workshop, staring at the sky. The first Zorak ships were visible now, black specks growing larger with each passing hour. "You're afraid," she said softly. Eli shook his head. "Not for myself." "For who, then?" "For everyone who thinks peace lasts forever." They sat in silence as the rain grew heavier. The city lights shimmered through the downpour like distant stars. Then T-Vala asked the question he'd been dreading. "What are you going to do?" He closed his eyes. He could walk away. He could hide in the shelters and pretend he was just a mechanic, but he knew he wouldn't, he never could. "Something I swore I'd never do again," he said. That night, Eli returned to his workshop. He locked the door behind him, then crossed to a section of the floor that looked ordinary, but wasn't. He pressed a hidden switch, and a metal panel slid aside to reveal a narrow stairway descending into darkness. The air was cool and dry below, smelling faintly of oil and steel. Eli flipped on the lights. The room was small but filled with ghosts from a forgotten past. Weapons wrapped in cloth, armor sealed in crates, data cores marked with warning symbols. And at the center, a sleek black rifle, human-made, old but deadly. His hands trembled as he reached for it. He had buried this part of himself centuries ago. The soldier, the strategist, the killer. But the galaxy was about to learn a truth it had forgotten. Humans didn't forget. They waited. They adapted. And when the storm finally came, they remembered exactly how to fight. The next morning, the skies over Kersh were filled with warships. The Zorak fleet, dark and jagged, blotted out the stars as it descended. Coalition ships rose to meet them, but one by one they were torn apart by superior firepower. From the streets of Vea Prime, the people watched in horror as debris rained down like burning meteors. "This is a slaughter," T-Vala whispered, her 4 eyes wide with fear. Eli stood beside her, his face cold and hard. "The Coalition doesn't understand the enemy they're facing." "And you do." "I've fought them before, and I beat them." "How?" she asked, her voice trembling. "By not fighting the way they expect." Explosions lit the horizon. The city shook. Somewhere above, a GDC battleship split apart in a fireball. Sirens wailed across the colony. T-Vala grabbed his arm. "Eli, what are you going to do?" He turned to her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw not the quiet mechanic, but the soldier he once was. "Something stupid," he said. Hours later, the first Zorak landing craft broke through the atmosphere, descending toward the jungle outskirts. They were massive and armored, bristling with plasma cannons. They carried warriors bred for conquest, towering reptilian beasts with armor fused to their flesh. But none of them saw the small transmission beamed silently into orbit from Eli's hidden workshop. It was a signal encoded in an ancient human cipher sent across light years. A signal only one group would recognize. The words were simple. Omega Protocol authorized. Far away, deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers that officially did not exist, red lights began to flash. Alarms sounded. Sleeper units that had slumbered for centuries stirred awake. And in the dark, humanity's oldest, most dangerous secret was whispered aloud once more. "We never forgot how to fight." The rain turned red as it fell through the burning sky. Hours after the first Zorak bombardments, the once bright skyline of Vea Prime was nothing but smoke and fire. Streets were cratered, buildings lay in ruins, and the proud banners of the Galactic Defense Coalition, banners meant to symbolize strength and unity, hung in tatters. For the first time in 3 centuries, Kersh was a war zone. And Eli Mercer had work to do. He moved like a shadow through the ruined streets, slipping past alien patrols and automated drones. Most civilians were huddled underground in shelters, but some wandered aimlessly, shocked and disoriented by the sudden violence. Eli stopped to help a wounded Varen child, wrapping a bandage around her arm and sending her with a group of survivors to the lower levels. "Why are you doing this?" T-Vala asked quietly as she followed him, her 4 eyes scanning the smoke-choked street. "Because no one else will," Eli said without slowing down. "You're not a soldier anymore." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's what I keep telling myself." They slipped into an abandoned communications tower near the edge of the city. Inside, the lights flickered weakly. Consoles sparked and hummed. Most of the equipment was destroyed, but not the one thing Eli needed. The transmitter. He had already sent the signal the night before. Now he needed confirmation. He powered up the encrypted relay, fingers dancing across the ancient human interface. A string of code flashed across the screen, then a voice crackled to life, deep and calm. Command to Ghost Operative Mercer. Signal received. Protocol Omega authorized. Initial units en route. T'Valla's jaw dropped. That's Earth, that's your people. Not the ones you know, Eli said. This is something different. What are you talking about? Eli stared at the rain beating against the shattered window. He hoped never to speak these words again, but if T'Valla was going to survive what was coming, she needed the truth. 3 centuries ago, after the last human war ended, Earth had made a decision. No more armies, no more battles. Humanity would build ships for exploration, not destruction. They would solve problems with diplomacy, not guns. But some people, the old soldiers, the strategists, the realists, had argued that peace was not the same as safety. That someday, someone would come who didn't care about treaties or trade. And so they had built a secret. The Omega Corps. An invisible force of warriors, scientists, and tacticians. Hidden bases, sleeper cells, entire training programs buried beneath the illusion of peace. They had never fought an open battle. They had never revealed themselves. They had waited. And now the time had come. We dismantled our armies, Eli explained, but we didn't forget how to fight. We just decided we'd only ever do it when there was no other choice. T'Valla was silent for a long time. Rain pattered against the broken glass. Distant thunder echoed, or maybe it was another explosion. I thought your people hated war, she said at last. We do, Eli said. That's why we got good at it. 2 days later, the first human transport ships arrived, silent, unmarked, and cloaked from Zorak sensors. They landed deep in Kersh's southern jungles, far from the main cities, where the towering trees and perpetual mist would hide them from the enemy's eyes. Eli was there to meet them. The hatch of the lead ship hissed open, and men and women stepped out, not diplomats, not traders, not explorers. Soldiers. Their armor was matte black, designed for stealth. Their weapons were ballistic, not energy-based, primitive to alien eyes, but devastating in close-quarters combat. The insignia on their shoulders was simple, a white Omega symbol on a field of gray. Mercer, said a grizzled man with silver hair and a scar across his jaw. Been a long time. Colonel Rourke, Eli said, shaking his hand. Didn't think I'd ever see you again. Didn't think we'd ever need you again, Rourke replied. But here we are. He looked at the forest around them, damp, dense, and filled with strange bioluminescent plants. Perfect terrain, he muttered. We're going to make them regret setting foot here. Over the next week, the hidden base took shape. The Omega soldiers built bunkers into the jungle floor, concealed by natural growth. They set up communication arrays under thick foliage. Drones disguised as native wildlife took to the skis, gathering intel on Zorak movements. And Eli became something he thought he'd buried forever. A leader. He trained with the new recruits, many of them barely out of their teens but already hardened by endless drills. He taught alien volunteers how to move silently through the underbrush, how to use terrain as a weapon, how to fight an enemy who was stronger and better armed. T'Valla watched from the edge of the training grounds, her scientific instruments clutched tightly in her hands. You're teaching them to be ghosts, she said softly. That's the only way we win, Eli replied. We can't outgun the Zorak, we can't outnumber them, but we can outthink them. She hesitated. I want to help. You already are, he said, glancing at the data slate in her hand. Your research on Kersh's plant life, you said some of those spores react violently to heat. Yes, she said. They're harmless until exposed to plasma discharges, then they combust. Eli smiled. Let's weaponize that. While the Omega teams prepared in silence, the Zorak pressed their advantage. Their fleets crushed the last of the GDC's orbital defenses. Their ground troops, towering reptilian soldiers in living armor, advanced deeper into Kersh's territory, confident that no resistance remained. They were wrong. The first ambush happened in the Heshar Basin, a swampy lowland where Zorak supply convoys moved between their forward bases. A column of heavy walkers was marching through the muck when the ground beneath them erupted in fire. Improvised explosives, triggered by heat-sensitive spores, tore through the column. Before the Zorak could react, they were hit from the trees. Bullets sliced through the rain. Smoke grenades blinded their sensors. By the time reinforcements arrived, half the convoy was gone and the attackers had vanished without a trace. More attacks followed. Communication towers exploded. Patrols disappeared into the jungle. Fuel depots burned overnight. Zorak commanders reported enemies they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't understand. "They fight like shadows," one terrified soldier reported before his transmission cut out. "They strike and vanish. We fire into the trees, but there's nothing there, nothing." Panic began to spread. In a hidden command tent deep in the jungle, Colonel Rourke studied the holographic map. Red markers showed Zorak positions. Blue markers showed human strikes. "They're pulling back," he said with a grin. "Our casualty ratio is 50-1. "Good," Eli said. "Let them feel hunted." T-Vala entered, breathless, carrying a data pad. "I intercepted a transmission. You need to hear this." She played the recording. A guttural Zorak voice filled the tent. "Kersh is not the final objective. It is merely the first step. Once the colony falls, the fleet will advance toward the Sol system. Earth will burn." The room fell silent. Eli's stomach turned cold. He had expected this, deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud was something else entirely. "How long?" Rourke asked. 6 weeks, T-Vala said. "Maybe less." Rourke looked at Eli. "We can't hold them off forever. Even with our tactics, they'll adapt. They always do." Eli nodded. "Then we need to hit them where it hurts. We find their command center, we take their intel, and we stop that invasion before it starts." That night, as the rain drummed softly on the leaves, Eli stood alone on a ridge overlooking the Zorak landing zone. Fires burned in the distance. Dropships rose and fell like angry insects. The enemy looked unstoppable, a tide of steel and fury rolling across the land. But he wasn't afraid. He had been here before, outnumbered, outgunned, written off as weak. And every time, humanity had done the same thing. They adapted. They survived. They won. T-Vala approached quietly, her boots sinking into the wet soil. "You're planning something dangerous, aren't you?" "Always," Eli said with a tired smile. "Will it work?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know this: if we fail here, Earth is next, and I'm not going to let that happen." She stood beside him, watching the enemy ships descend. "Then I'll help you, whatever you need." Eli looked at her, this alien scientist who believed in him when no one else did, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. "Hope. Then let's show them," he said. Show them what humanity really is." Far above Kersh, the Zorak fleet prepared for its final assault. Their commanders believed the colony was already theirs. Their war councils spoke of Earth as if it were inevitable. They didn't know that deep in the jungle below, a storm was building. Not one of rain, one of human fury. And this time, the galaxy wouldn't see it coming. The jungle swallowed them whole. Days turned into nights under Kersh's endless rain canopy. Zorak troops marched through the thick undergrowth, their sensors sweeping in wide arcs, plasma rifles ready. But they found nothing, no enemy, no trace, not even footprints. The jungle itself seemed to mock them, hiding the ghosts that stalked them from the shadows. Those ghosts were human. Eli crouched in the damp foliage, his breath slow and steady. The rest of Strike Team 3 waited beside him, 5 soldiers in matte black armor, their faces streaked with green and brown paint. They were invisible here, their suits coated with adaptive camouflage that mimicked the surrounding vegetation. Through his binoculars, Eli watched a Zorak patrol lumber down the trail below. 12 soldiers, heavy armor, standard formation, predictable, rigid, confident. "Command, this is 3, Eli whispered into his comm. "Patrol in Sector 9, engaging." "Copy 3, came Colonel Rourke's voice. "Make it loud." Eli raised his fist and then lowered it. The jungle exploded. Buried charges detonated under the patrol's feet, blasting the lead soldiers into the air. Smoke grenades hissed, filling the clearing with a choking mist. As the Zorak shouted in confusion, the humans opened fire. Bullets ripped through armor seams. Frag grenades bounced off tree trunks and exploded at knee level. The Zorak returned fire wildly, burning holes in trees and ground, but their enemy was never where they expected. Within 2 minutes, it was over. 11 Zorak lay dead. One was wounded, deliberately spared. Eli approached, rifle ready, and knelt beside the alien, who hissed and bared its teeth. "You're not fighting soldiers," the Zorak growled. "You're fighting cowards." Eli leaned close. "We're fighting to win." The Zorak spat blood and laughed, even as he coughed. "It doesn't matter. Kersh is just the beginning." Eli's grip tightened. "What do you mean?" "Earth," the alien hissed. "The homeworld, our fleet gathers even now. You will watch it burn." The prisoner died before they could get more answers. But the message was clear. This war wasn't just about Kersh. It was about humanity itself. That night in the hidden base deep within the jungle, the resistance gathered. Holograms of Zorak fleet movements flickered across the room. Red dots, invasion staging points, appeared all along the galactic rim. "They're preparing for a full-scale assault," Tivala said, her voice trembling. "If Kersh falls, Earth is next." Colonel Rourke rubbed a scar on his jaw. "Then Kersh doesn't fall." Eli nodded. "We bleed them here. We make this planet a graveyard they'll never forget." The next weeks were chaos for the Zorak. Supply convoys vanished. Communications went dark. Outposts were found with every guard dead, their weapons gone, and messages scrawled in their own language. "We see you." Small, surgical strikes replaced traditional battles. Teams of 4 or 5 humans would infiltrate bases under the cover of storms, planting charges, sabotaging fuel depots, poisoning food supplies. They'd disappear before alarms could even sound. Even Tivala's scientists joined the fight, engineering new tools from the environment, spores that became fire when shot with plasma, roots that detonated like mines when stepped on, native insects drawn to the heat signatures of enemy armor. Every corner of the jungle became a weapon. The Zorak response was swift and brutal. Villages suspected of harboring humans were burned. Civilians were rounded up. Entire sections of jungle were set ablaze with incendiary bombs. But still, the resistance fought. In one daring operation, Strike Team 2 infiltrated a Zorak orbital uplink station, seizing vital fleet data before destroying the installation. In another, Omega Commandos ambushed a mechanized column using nothing but traps, explosives, and the planet's terrain, leaving behind twisted wrecks of vehicles that had once been unstoppable. Panic began to ripple through the Zorak ranks. Veteran soldiers refused patrol duty. Commanders argued over strategy. The Dominion had conquered 40 worlds, but never like this. Never against an enemy who refused to fight by their rules. One evening, as rain lashed against the canopy, Tivala sat beside Eli at the campfire. The jungle hummed with life around them, insects chirping, distant thunder rolling. "You've changed," she said. Eli stared into the flames. "I've just remembered who I used to be." "No," she said. "You're more than that. You're not fighting for glory. You're fighting for people." He gave a small smile. "That's the only reason worth fighting." She hesitated, then added softly, "I was wrong about your species. We all were. We thought you were afraid of war, but now I see you just hate it." "Exactly," Eli said. "We hate it so much that when we have to fight, we fight to end it, quickly, completely, and on our terms." 3 days later, the Resistance launched its boldest operation yet. Operation Needlepoint, the infiltration of a Zorak field headquarters near the ruined city of Eshra. The mission was simple: capture their command database and learn everything about the Earth invasion plans. But nothing about the operation would be easy. Eli led a 12-person strike force. They moved under cover of night, crawling through mud, slipping between sentry lines, cutting power to sensors. Tivala's devices jammed Zorak communications, while drone decoys drew attention away from the perimeter. By dawn, they were inside. The facility was a fortress, fortified bunkers, patrol mechs, and rows of armored transports. The team split into groups. Eli and 3 others headed for the central data vault. 2 guards ahead, whispered Sergeant Vale, raising his rifle. "Take them," Eli ordered. Silent shots hissed. The guards fell without a sound. They breached the vault and began downloading files. Progress was slow. The encryption was far more advanced than expected. Eli's heart pounded as he watched the timer tick down. 5 minutes, 4, 3. "Contact," shouted a voice over comms. "We're blown." Gunfire echoed through the halls. Explosions rocked the base. Zorak soldiers poured in from all sides. "Abort," Vale asked. Eli shook his head. We hold until the download's done. The minutes stretched into eternity. They fought in the corridors, laying down covering fire, tossing grenades into advancing troops. One by one, team members were wounded or killed, but the data kept transferring. Finally, the console beeped, download complete. Go, Eli shouted. They never made it out. A blast shook the room, throwing Eli to the floor. Dazed, he tried to crawl, but heavy boots stomped toward him. He looked up into the cold, reptilian eyes of a Zorak officer in crimson armor. Well, well, the alien rumbled, the ghost of Tanny's lives. Eli froze. That name, Tanny's, was a wound from another lifetime. A battle where he had turned the tide against impossible odds. A battle that had earned him both medals and nightmares. You remember me? Eli said quietly. How could I forget? The officer sneered. The human who slaughtered an entire battalion with nothing but a handful of men. You are a legend among our people, a reminder that humans are dangerous. The Zorak aimed his weapon, and now you die. Eli woke in darkness. Chains bound his wrists and ankles. His head throbbed. The air was cold and metallic, a holding cell deep within the Zorak command complex. He was alone. Or so he thought. The door slid open, and the crimson-armored officer stepped inside. My name is Commander Croth, he said, and you, Mercer, are going to tell me everything about your resistance. Eli spat blood onto the floor. You'll get nothing. Croth smiled, showing rows of serrated teeth. We shall see. Meanwhile, back in the jungle base, panic rippled through the resistance. Mercer's team is gone, Rourke said grimly. No signals, no survivors. Tivala's 4 eyes shimmered with tears. We can't leave him. We don't even know where he is. I'll find him, she said. I have the data from the uplink station, if we trace their communications and cross-reference troop movements. Rourke sighed. Even if we did, the command center is suicide. It's too heavily guarded. Tivala looked up, her expression hard as stone. Then we'll do something suicidal. In his cell, Eli stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of machinery. He had failed. The mission was a disaster. The invasion was still coming. But one thought kept him alive. If the Zorak were still trying to break him, it meant they were still afraid. And if they were afraid, it meant humanity still had a chance. Far above Kersh, hidden in the shadow of a gas giant, a massive Zorak fleet gathered. Its destination was set. Its orders were clear. Next stop, Earth. And humanity had 6 weeks to stop it. The cell was cold, always cold. Eli Mercer had been in it for 4 days, maybe 5. He had stopped counting. The only light came from a thin red strip that never turned off, casting everything in a dull, bloody glow. They gave him water but no food. They questioned him but got nothing. And they hurt him. The Zorak didn't believe in quick interrogations. They believed in breaking things, bones, minds, spirits, until the truth spilled out. But Eli had been trained for this. Pain was an old enemy, and he knew how to fight it. What he couldn't fight was the silence. Every second that passed was a second closer to Earth's destruction. Every hour wasted here was another hour his people weren't ready, and that thought cut deeper than any blade. Commander Croth visited him again on the 6th day. The Zorak warlord entered with a slow, deliberate stride, his crimson armor gleaming under the red light. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. The guards outside the cell carried enough. You've lasted longer than most, Croth said, his voice a deep rumble. I respect that. Glad to be admired, Eli rasped. His lips were cracked, his body covered in bruises, but his eyes still burned with defiance. I offer you a choice, Croth continued. Tell us the location of your resistance base, and I will spare your world. Eli laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You expect me to believe that? Croth's grin was all teeth. No, but perhaps you will believe this. I have the authority to alter the invasion plan. I can choose which cities burn first, which colonies are spared. Perhaps Earth itself cannot be saved, but maybe your home, your family can. Eli stared at him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. Do you know why humans are dangerous? Croth tilted his head. Enlighten me. Because when you give us a choice between our own survival and doing what's right, Eli leaned forward, chains rattling. We pick both. Back in the jungle base, Colonel Rourke slammed his fist against the table. We can't just sit here. Vala didn't flinch. We're not. I've traced the transmission patterns from the Zorak command center. I know where they're holding him. Rourke shook his head. It's a fortress, thousands of troops, anti-air defenses. Even our best team wouldn't make it past the perimeter. Then we don't send a team, Vala said. We send everyone. The room fell silent. That's suicide, one of the operatives said. It's worse if we do nothing, she replied. Eli is more than a man, he's a symbol. If they break him, they break us all. Rourke stared at the map, jaw tight. He hated this. Every military instinct screamed at him to stay hidden to continue the guerrilla campaign, but deep down he knew Vala was right. Start planning, he said. We're getting him back. Meanwhile, the war beyond Kersh grew worse. Zorak fleets struck deeper into coalition space. Outer colonies fell within days. Refugee convoys streamed toward the core worlds carrying stories of slaughter. The GDC held emergency meetings, but nothing changed. They were still too slow, too cautious, too focused on honorable engagements. Earth remained unprotected. News of the planned invasion reached the highest levels of human government. Panic spread. Plans for mass evacuation were drawn up, but quietly, secretly. The public was told nothing. They still believed the coalition would protect them. They were wrong. Eli's condition worsened. On the 10th day, he could barely stand. On the 11th, he stopped trying. Still, he spoke no words of betrayal. You are a fool, Croth said during his next visit. Your silence will cost your species everything. Eli's eyes burned with something colder than hate. You think you're fighting soldiers, he whispered, but you're not. Then what are you? Survivors. Croth's smile faltered, just for a second, and Eli saw something there, a flicker of doubt. The rescue mission launched on the 12th night. It was a plan born of desperation and daring, exactly the kind humans excelled at. Dozens of small strike teams would infiltrate the Zorak perimeter from different directions, forcing them to divide their defenses. Meanwhile, Vala and a core unit would breach the central complex itself. The operation was codenamed Ashfall. The first explosions rocked the Zorak lines at midnight. Remote charges blew apart fuel tanks. Communications went offline. Patrols vanished into smoke and chaos. The Dominion, accustomed to predictable battles, was caught completely off guard. Vala led her team through a maintenance tunnel beneath the command center. The air was hot and heavy with the stench of machinery. The walls vibrated with distant explosions. 2 minutes to breach, whispered Sergeant Vale, the point man. Make it 1, Vala said, clutching the locator beacon that pulsed with Eli's coordinates. The charge detonated silently, opening a narrow hole into the lower detention block. Guards swarmed toward the breach, but they weren't prepared for humans trained in close-quarters combat. The first wave went down before they could fire. The second hesitated, and that hesitation was fatal. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they carved their way deeper. Eli was barely conscious when the cell door blew open. He blinked against the bright light as a familiar voice shouted his name. Vala. She was at his side in seconds, helping him to his feet. We're getting you out. Shouldn't have come, he murmured. Too late for that, she said, pulling his arm over her shoulder. They moved quickly, supported by Vale and 2 other soldiers. Alarms wailed through the complex. Sirens blared. Zorak troops converged from all sides. Extraction point is 500 meters east, Vale shouted. Go, Vala yelled. They ran. The corridors shook as heavy weapons fire slammed into the walls. Plasma bolts scorched the air. Humans returned fire, covering the retreat with deadly precision, but for every enemy they dropped, 2 more appeared. Eli stumbled, his vision swimming. Vala held him up, refusing to let go. Almost there, she said, just a little farther. Then the blast hit. The ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing off the escape route. Vale's team was cut off. The last thing Eli heard before the dust swallowed everything was Vala screaming his name. When he woke again, they were separated. Vala had been captured during the retreat. The resistance had escaped with the data from the mission, but not her. The jungle base was quiet, grim. They had saved Eli, but at a cost. She knew the risk, Rourke said quietly. We all did. She saved my life, Eli said. Now I'm going to save hers. Eli. "No," he said, his voice like iron. "I'm done hiding. I'm done reacting. It's time we end this." The information T-Vala had recovered before her capture was critical. It confirmed what they feared. The main Zorak invasion fleet was assembling near the Dreskar Rift, a hyperspace choke point only 2 jumps from Earth. And there was more. The data contained troop deployments, fleet movements, and a vulnerability. A hidden command relay deep inside the Kersh command complex that linked directly to the invasion network. If they destroyed it, they could disrupt the Zorak's coordination long enough to cripple the offensive. It was a suicide mission, exactly the kind Eli was born for. 3 days later, the Resistance prepared for its most dangerous operation yet, Operation Harbinger. The objective was simple: infiltrate the heart of the Zorak command, rescue T-Vala, and destroy the relay, even if it meant none of them came back. Eli stood before the assembled soldiers, his body still weak but his voice steady. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "Some of us won't make it home, maybe none of us. But if we succeed, Earth has a chance. If we fail, billions die." He looked around at the faces, human, Varen, and other species who had joined their cause. Soldiers, scientists, farmers, survivors. "You know why we fight," he said. "Not for glory, not for vengeance. We fight because someone has to, because when the universe calls us weak, we prove them wrong." A silence fell over the camp. Then Sergeant Vale spoke. "When do we leave?" Eli smiled. "At dawn." That night, as the jungle whispered around him, Eli sat alone, staring at the stars beyond the canopy. Somewhere out there, the fleet that would burn Earth was gathering. Somewhere in the heart of enemy territory, T-Vala was waiting. And he knew in his bones, in his blood, that this was the point of no return. The enemy thought humanity had forgotten how to fight. Tomorrow, they would remember. The infiltration began under a blood-red sky. At dawn, the jungle shuddered with the heavy march of war machines. The Zorak tightened their grip on Kersh, building new fortifications and deploying orbital surveillance drones. Every kilometer of territory they held was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Getting close to their central command was nearly impossible. Nearly. Eli Mercer had done the impossible before. "Final systems check," he ordered, crouched beside a matte black dropship hidden beneath a canopy of woven camouflage. "Comms secure, cloak engaged, weapons." "Online," Sergeant Vale said. "Charges primed, EMP warheads ready." "Good," Eli replied. He glanced at the squad gathered around him, 20 soldiers, human and alien alike. Every one of them had volunteered for this. Every one of them understood they might not come back. "Listen up," Eli said quietly. "Our objective is the relay core. It's deep beneath the command center, heavily guarded, heavily shielded. We breach, plant the charges, and extract T-Vala on the way out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." "Understood," Vale said, "but if it comes down to one or the other." Eli's eyes hardened. "We save her." There was no hesitation in his voice, none at all. The dropship launched silently, its stealth systems bending light and sound. It skimmed low over the jungle canopy, invisible to orbital scanners. Below them, columns of Zorak troops moved through the ruins of villages, dragging prisoners toward internment camps. Smoke rose from burning forests. The war was escalating. "5 minutes to insertion," Vale said from the pilot's seat. Eli adjusted the strap of his rifle and closed his eyes. He wasn't praying. He didn't believe in much anymore, but he thought of T-Vala, her stubborn curiosity, her relentless optimism, the way she had believed in humanity even when her people had mocked them. She was more than an ally, more than a friend. She was the reason he still believed they were worth saving. They landed in a ravine 2 kilometers from the command center. From there, they moved on foot, silent, unseen, ghosts in the jungle. Eli's team split into 2 squads. Alpha would infiltrate the relay complex and plant the explosives. Bravo would breach the detention block and extract T-Vala. The timing had to be perfect. A second too early or too late, and they'd all be dead. "Remember," Eli whispered as they reached the perimeter fence. "Zorak sensors detect thermal signatures, not visual. Keep body heat low." They sprayed themselves with a coolant mist, a trick humanity had developed centuries ago, and slipped past the patrol lines. Guards passed within meters of them without noticing. It was almost too easy. That thought should have been a warning. Inside the detention block, Bravo team moved like shadows. 2 guards went down with silenced shots. A third never saw the blade that cut his throat. The squad reached the prisoner cells without raising an alarm. "T-Vala," hissed Corporal Lyon, scanning the rows of cells. She was there, bruised but alive, her crystalline skin dim under the harsh lighting. When she saw them, her eyes widened with disbelief. "You came," she whispered. "Of course we did," Lyon said, unlocking the door. But as they stepped inside, T-Vala's expression changed. Fear replaced relief. "Wait." The blast hit before she could finish. The corridor erupted in fire and shrapnel. Bravo team was thrown backward, bodies slamming into the walls. Sirens wailed. Red lights bathed the hallway. It was a trap. Eli felt the shockwave from 3 floors below. His radio crackled with frantic voices. "Bravo is compromised. Ambush, we're pinned." "Fall back," Eli shouted. "Abort extraction, I repeat." "No," T-Vala's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't come for me, finish the mission." "Not happening," Eli growled. "We're not leaving you behind." "Eli, listen to me," her voice shook. "They expected you. This isn't about me, it's about you. They want you here." "Good," he said coldly. "They got what they wanted." Commander Croth stood in the relay control chamber, watching the human infiltration unfold on a tactical display. He had expected them to try this. It was in their nature, loyalty over logic, compassion over caution. It was their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. "They'll come for her," he told his lieutenants. "They can't help themselves. When they do, we'll crush them all." The battle for the detention block turned brutal. Bravo team fought like cornered animals, using smoke grenades and improvised traps to slow the Zorak advance. Plasma bolts scorched the air. The walls trembled under heavy weapons fire. 2 soldiers went down, then a third. Still they held. Eli arrived with Alpha team minutes later, guns blazing. The corridor became a killing ground. Zorak troops fell in droves, but more poured in from every direction. "We have to move," Vale shouted over the noise. "Plant the charges," Eli yelled back. "I'll get T-Vala." Vale hesitated. "If we don't blow that relay now." "Do it," Eli barked. He kicked down the cell door and rushed inside. T-Vala was shackled to a wall, her body trembling from exhaustion. "Idiot," she said weakly. "I told you not to come." "Yeah, well," Eli said, cutting her restraints. "I'm bad at following orders." They fought their way out room by room, corridor by corridor. Every step was paid for in blood. Vale's team reached the relay core and planted the charges. A countdown began, 5 minutes until detonation. "Extraction point's hot," Vale reported. "We'll never make it in time." "Then we make it," Eli replied. "No matter what." Croth watched the timer on his display. 5 minutes. He had underestimated them again. Even trapped, even dying, the humans still refused to surrender. "Prepare the fallback," he ordered. "If they destroy the relay, we'll shift control to the secondary node." "But that will take hours," a lieutenant protested. "Then we buy those hours," Croth snarled. "All units converge on the relay chamber, kill them all." The last stand took place in the main access hall, a cavernous chamber filled with steel walkways and pulsing conduits. Human soldiers took cover behind shattered consoles, laying down suppressive fire. Zorak troops poured in from every entrance. 2 minutes, Vale shouted. "Hold," Eli yelled. T-Vala crouched beside him, firing a scavenged plasma rifle with surprising accuracy. "You humans are insane," she muttered. "Compliment accepted." A grenade exploded nearby, throwing Eli to the ground. His ears rang, his vision blurred, he tasted blood. "Eli," T-Vala shouted, dragging him to cover. "I'm fine," he lied. 1 minute. The firefight intensified. Ammunition ran low. Bodies littered the floor, human and Zorak alike. The enemy was closing in. 30 seconds. Eli's rifle clicked empty. He drew his sidearm and kept firing. T-Vala took a hit to the shoulder but stayed upright, teeth gritted in pain. 10 seconds. Croth himself entered the chamber, plasma blade in hand. "This ends now." Eli stood to face him. "Yeah," he said, "it does." The blast shook the world. The relay core imploded, a sphere of blue-white light swallowing the chamber. Shockwaves ripped through the base. Systems went dark, alarms died, the entire command network collapsed in seconds. Croth was thrown across the room. Eli slammed into a bulkhead, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. T-Vala screamed his name as debris rained around them. And then silence. When Eli regained consciousness, the base was in ruins. Fires burned everywhere. The Zorak were in chaos, their communications crippled, their chain of command shattered. The resistance had achieved the impossible. Vale appeared through the smoke, limping but alive. "We did it," he said, coughing. "We actually did it." Eli looked around. Half his team was gone. The survivors were battered and bleeding. But they were alive, and T-Vala was beside him, her hand gripping his. "You saved me," she whispered. "Not just you," he said. "We saved everyone." The cost had been enormous. Dozens of operatives dead, their strongest base compromised, and yet it was a turning point. Without the relay, the Zorak invasion timetable was delayed by weeks, enough time for humanity to prepare, enough time for the coalition to wake up. But Croth was still alive, and as his battered flagship limped into orbit, he swore vengeance. He had underestimated humanity for the last time. The next wave would not be delayed, it would be overwhelming. War was coming, not just to Kersh, but to Earth itself. The skis over Kersh burned. Columns of black smoke rose from Zorak outposts. Fires raged across fuel depots and weapons platforms. Communications arrays lay in ruins. The Dominion's once impenetrable grip was cracking, and humanity was behind every fracture. 3 weeks had passed since the destruction of the relay core. In that time, the resistance had transformed from a scattered insurgency into a coordinated strike force. They had sabotaged supply lines, hijacked enemy transports, and assassinated key officers. Entire divisions of Zorak troops now refused to patrol the jungle without heavy armor and air support. But the Dominion was far from beaten. Croth's reinforcements had arrived, over 60,000 troops and a fleet of orbital gunships. Their objective was simple: annihilate the resistance and wipe humanity from Kersh. Eli Mercer studied the tactical display inside their hidden base. Red markers, Zorak forces, filled the map like a spreading infection. Blue markers, human and allied cells, blinked in clusters around key strategic points. They were outnumbered 12-1, outgunned, outmatched. And yet they were winning. "How long before they move on the capital?" asked Sergeant Vale, leaning over the map. 2 weeks, maybe less, Eli replied. "They're regrouping, consolidating their supply chains, but once they're ready, they'll hit hard." "And Earth?" Eli's jaw tightened. 2 months, maybe 3, they're building the fleet now. Silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what that meant. Kersh was the last line of defense. If they lost here, humanity's homeworld would burn. T-Vala entered, her arm still bandaged from the last mission. "I have something," she announced, dropping a data tablet on the table. "We recovered this from a crashed Zorak recon drone." Eli scrolled through the data. It was worse than he expected: orbital surveillance patterns, troop movements, planned planetary bombardment coordinates. But then he saw something that made him pause. "What's this?" he asked. "A vulnerability," T-Vala said. "The Zorak supply network depends on a single orbital command ship, the Warspire. It controls logistics, troop deployments, even planetary shields. Take it out and the whole occupation collapses." Vale whistled. "And how exactly do we take down a battleship the size of a city?" "With brains," Eli said, smiling grimly, "not brawn." 2 nights later, Operation Spearpoint began. It was the boldest plan humanity had ever attempted, and the most dangerous. The idea was simple: hijack a Zorak supply transport, use it to infiltrate the Warspire, plant a sabotage package in its core reactor, and destroy it from the inside. Simple didn't mean easy. "Boarding team will consist of 6 operatives," Eli briefed his unit inside a captured freighter. "Once we're aboard, we'll have 1 hour before they realize we're not who we say we are. After that, we're ghosts." T-Vala handed out small, cylindrical devices. "EMP charges. These will disable internal security systems for 3 minutes. That's our window to get into the reactor core." Vale grinned. 3 minutes luxury. The mission depended on deception, precision, and timing. 3 things humanity had mastered long ago. The freighter docked with the Warspire without incident. Their forged transponder codes worked perfectly. Zorak crew scanned the cargo, saw nothing unusual, and waved them through. Eli felt his pulse quicken as they stepped onto the colossal ship. Its corridors were enormous, designed for the towering frames of Zorak warriors. The air smelled of metal and ozone. The distant hum of reactors reverberated through the deck. "Keep your helmets on and your heads down," Eli whispered. "We're just another transport crew." They moved deeper into the ship, passing checkpoints and patrols. Every step felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. One wrong move, one suspicious glance, and they'd be dead before they reached the core. Finally, they reached the engineering deck. The heart of the Warspire loomed ahead, a pulsating fusion reactor surrounded by armored conduits and security fields. "Charges ready?" Eli asked. "Ready," Vale replied. "EMP in 3, 2, 1. The lights flickered, alarms chirped, security systems went dark. "Move," Eli shouted. They sprinted toward the reactor chamber. Two guards rounded the corner, weapons raised, but they never fired. A single suppressed shot dropped them both. "Planting charges," Tivala said, kneeling by the reactor's control matrix. 30 seconds. But just as she finished arming the device, the deck shook violently. Klaxons screamed. Red lights bathed the corridor. "They know we're here," Vale yelled. "Finish the job," Eli barked. Tivala pressed the final sequence. "Detonation in 10 minutes. "Time to leave," Vale muttered. They ran. The Warspire erupted in chaos. Sirens blared. Troops flooded the corridors. Security drones swarmed the halls like angry hornets. The humans moved fast, ducking into maintenance shafts and ventilation tunnels, evading patrols by inches. "Docking bays sealed," Vale reported. "We'll never reach the freighter in time." "Plan B," Eli said. "Escape pods." They fought their way through 2 platoons of soldiers, blowing through blast doors and sealing corridors behind them. Plasma bolts sizzled past their heads. The floor shook with distant explosions. Every second was a battle. "Pod in sight," Tivala shouted. They dove inside, slamming the hatch shut as enemy fire peppered the hull. Eli punched the launch controls. The pod shot out of the Warspire like a bullet, just as the reactor went critical. The explosion was blinding. A silent wave of light and fire consumed the Warspire, tearing it apart from within. Fragments of the once mighty battleship rained down toward Kersh's atmosphere. Cheers erupted across resistance channels. "Warspire destroyed," Vale reported, grinning. "Their logistics are in chaos." Eli exhaled slowly, one step closer. But victory came at a cost. The Zorak's rage was immediate and ferocious. Without the Warspire, they couldn't coordinate their ground forces effectively, but they could still unleash hell from orbit. Entire jungle regions were scorched by plasma bombardments. Civilian settlements were wiped out. The Dominion's vengeance was swift and merciless. "Estimated casualties?" Eli asked grimly as reports came in. "Over 10,000, Tivala whispered, and rising." Eli's hands tightened into fists. "We knew they retaliate, but we can't let it stop us. Every strike we make weakens them. Every day we hold out buys Earth more time." "And if Earth isn't ready?" Vale asked. Eli looked up at the holographic map of the galaxy, now glowing with Zorak movements. "Then we make them ready." Weeks passed, the resistance campaign intensified. They began targeting infrastructure, not soldiers, disabling orbital relays, sabotaging fuel depots, poisoning supply chains. They unleashed misinformation campaigns that turned Zorak units against each other. They used captured transmitters to broadcast false orders, sending entire battalions marching into ambushes. They even hacked Zorak propaganda networks, broadcasting a simple message across the galaxy. "You believe we are weak. You believe we fear war, but we do not fear you. We do not fear death. We are humanity, and we fight to the last." The message spread like wildfire, rallying oppressed worlds and igniting resistance cells across Dominion space. Humanity's defiance became a symbol, a spark of hope in a darkening galaxy. But hope would soon be tested again. One night, deep beneath the jungle canopy, a scout stumbled into the resistance base, wounded, terrified, barely able to speak. "New fleet," he gasped. 70 warships inbound." The room went silent. "When?" Eli asked. 3 days, direct course, Kersh orbit. Vale swore, "We can't fight that, not even close." "They mean to end this," Tivala said quietly. "No more occupation, just annihilation." Eli stared at the star map, his mind racing. He had known this was coming. He had prepared for it, but now that it was here, the scale was staggering. They were out of time. "Then we do what humans always do," Eli said finally. "We adapt." The plan he proposed was audacious, insane, even. They would not face the fleet head-on. Instead, they would turn Kersh itself into a weapon. "We rig the orbital platforms as remote-controlled mines," Eli explained. "When their ships enter orbit, we detonate them simultaneously." "That will take out maybe a quarter of the fleet," Vale said. "What about the rest?" "That's where Phase 2 comes in." Eli zoomed in on a series of geothermal vents beneath the jungle. "We overload the geothermal reactors, trigger a chain reaction, volcanic eruptions, ash clouds, electromagnetic storms. The planet becomes a death trap." "Are you suggesting we weaponize the planet?" Tivala asked, shocked. "Yes," Eli said. "They think Kersh is their battlefield. We're going to make it their grave." For the next 72 hours, humanity worked without rest. Teams sabotaged planetary infrastructure. Orbital mines were rigged. Reactor cores were primed. The planet itself began to hum with destructive potential. When the Zorak fleet finally arrived, the trap was set. "Fleet entering orbit," Vale reported, staring at the tactical display. "All ships in range." "Phase 1, Eli ordered. Dozens of orbital platforms exploded in brilliant fireballs, tearing apart the vanguard of the Zorak armada. Massive ships tumbled into the atmosphere, disintegrating on entry. The rest of the fleet scattered, confused and disorganized. "Phase 2, Eli said. Deep below, the ground roared. Superheated gas surged through ancient vents. Mountains cracked. Volcanoes erupted in synchronized fury. The sky darkened beneath a churning storm of ash and lightning. Zorak landing craft were ripped apart mid-descent. Electronic systems failed. Communication networks collapsed. It was no longer a battlefield. It was a hellscape. In the chaos, humanity launched their final wave, small strike teams hitting command ships, sabotage units planting charges on orbital relays, psychological operations flooding Zorak channels with false retreat orders. The Dominion's invasion stalled, their fleets faltered, their armies hesitated. And for the first time since the war began, the Zorak were afraid. But the battle wasn't over. As the last wave of eruptions subsided and the surviving Zorak regrouped, sensors lit up with a terrifying signal. A super dreadnought, 10 times larger than any warship they had faced before, emerging from hyperspace. Croth was coming, and he was bringing the Dominion's wrath with him. The dreadnought tore out of hyperspace like a scar across the stars. It was enormous, 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapon arrays and shield projectors. Entire fleets could be built from the metal that formed its hull, and etched into its prow was the insignia of the Zorak Dominion's supreme warlord. Croth had arrived. The sky over Kersh boiled with fire and storm. Ash clouds churned above volcanoes, still spewing molten fury from humanity's trap. Orbit was a graveyard of shattered ships. But the Dominion's ultimate weapon descended undeterred, burning through the chaos like a spear of vengeance. "This is it," Vale said grimly, watching the tactical display. "Their command ship, their flagship." "The Blood Tyrant," Tivala whispered. "It's said to have never lost a battle." Eli Mercer stared at the massive vessel filling the screen. "Then today's the day." The dreadnought entered low orbit, its superlasers warming with a terrifying glow. Even a glancing shot from those guns could erase an entire city. The Dominion wasn't here to conquer anymore. They were here to end humanity. "Civilians?" Eli asked. "Evacuated to deep shelters," Tivala replied. "But they won't hold if that thing opens fire." "Then we don't give it the chance," Eli said. "We're going to take it down." Vale blinked. "That thing could shrug off a nuke. How the hell do we take it down?" Eli's eyes hardened. From the inside. The plan was madness, which meant it was perfect. While the Zorak fleet focused on the Resistance's orbital minefield, a small strike team would infiltrate the Blood Tyrant using the chaos as cover. Their goal, reach the Dreadnought's power core and trigger a catastrophic overload. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it, and yet not a single soldier hesitated. Humanity has always fought impossible battles, Eli said in the final briefing. From the first time we stood against the dark with sharpened sticks to the day we reached the stars, this isn't new to us, it's who we are. He looked at each of them, humans, Varens, and a dozen others who now called themselves brothers and sisters in arms. We don't fight because we're the strongest. We fight because we must, because someone has to, and if this is our last stand, then we make it count. The insertion was chaos from the start. Their stolen transport was nearly torn apart by flak as it pierced the dreadnought's shields. They crash-landed in a maintenance hangar, fire and smoke trailing behind them. Sirens blared instantly, but they were already moving. "Go, go, go," Eli shouted, leading the charge. They fought through corridors crawling with Zorek soldiers. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, explosions rocked the deck. But humanity's strike teams moved like ghosts, fast, precise, relentless. "Deck 12 secured," Vale called, pushing to the core chamber. "Time to detonation?" Eli asked. 8 minutes if we reach it now, less if they hit the reactor control room first. "Then we'd better be faster." Croth stood on the dreadnought's command bridge, watching the battle unfold below. Reports flooded in: infiltration alarms, reactor alerts, communication breakdowns. His subcommanders shouted conflicting orders. "Contain them," Croth roared. "I want every corridor sealed, every choke point defended. They will not reach the core." "Warlord," one officer said hesitantly, "they are advancing faster than expected, these humans." "Are insects," Croth snarled, "and like insects they will burn." But even he could feel it now, the unease. The creeping, unfamiliar sensation gnawing at the back of his mind. Fear. The battle for the reactor chamber was brutal. The humans reached it with 4 minutes left, but the Zorak were waiting. Hundreds of soldiers entrenched behind barricades. Automated turrets lined the walls. The chamber itself was a cathedral of light and steel, with the reactor pulsing at its center like a living heart. "Suppressing fire," Vale yelled, tossing a grenade over the barricade. The explosion shook the room. Eli's squad surged forward, laying down covering fire as T-Vala and her engineering team rushed to the reactor console. 2 minutes, she shouted. "I need more time." "Buy it," Eli barked. They fought inch by inch, every meter costing blood. Vale went down with a plasma bolt to the shoulder. Corporal Lyon dragged him to cover. T-Vala cursed as sparks erupted from the console, working with frantic speed. 60 seconds. "Almost there," she cried. Croth himself stormed into the chamber, his crimson armor gleaming. He carried a plasma blade as tall as Eli was, and his roar silenced the battle for a heartbeat. "Mercer," he bellowed, "face me." Eli stepped into the open. Their eyes met across the chaos, predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Croth towered over him, his presence radiating fury and hate. "You could have surrendered," the warlord growled. "You could have spared your people." "And let tyrants rule," Eli spat. "Not a chance." "Then you will die with them." "Maybe," Eli said, raising his rifle, "but not today." The two charged. Croth's blade swung in a blazing arc, cleaving through steel. Eli rolled beneath it, firing point-blank into the warlord's chest plate. The bolts scorched armor but didn't penetrate. Croth struck again, knocking Eli across the chamber. "Your defiance means nothing," he roared, raising his blade for the killing blow. Eli spat blood, smiling through the pain. "It means everything." He pulled a plasma grenade from his belt and slammed it against Croth's chest. The explosion hurled them both backward. Smoke filled the chamber. Croth roared in rage and pain, his armor cracked and sparking. 30 seconds, T-Vala shouted. "It's primed." Eli struggled to his feet, bleeding and battered. "Everyone fall back." The strike team retreated toward the hangar bay, fighting every step. The dreadnought shuddered as the overloaded reactor began to destabilize. Alarms screamed across the ship. Even the Zorak troops began to retreat. Croth staggered after them, fury burning in his eyes. "This isn't over, Mercer." "It never is," Eli said. They dove into the escape craft and launched just as the blood tyrant tore itself apart. The explosion was a star being born, a blinding, searing blast that split the heavens. Shockwaves rippled through orbit, tearing apart what remained of the Dominion fleet. The dreadnought, the symbol of Zorak supremacy, was gone. The impossible had been done. Kersh fell silent. For the first time since the war began, there were no Zorak ships in the sky, no marching columns, no orbital bombardments. The invasion was broken. The Dominion had been humbled, not by overwhelming firepower or superior numbers, but by the will of those who refused to yield. Humanity had shown the galaxy a truth older than empires. You do not defeat them by destroying their cities. You do not conquer them by breaking their armies. Because humanity's true weapon is not strength. It is resolve. Weeks later, the Galactic Council convened on Kersh. What began as a backwater jungle world had become the symbol of resistance, the place where the unstoppable had been stopped. The coalition, inspired by humanity's defiance, rallied. Dozens of species once too afraid to act now pledged fleets and armies to the cause. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned. And at the center of it all, Eli Mercer stood beside T. Vala, watching a sunrise burn through the ash. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked quietly. "No," Eli said, "but now they know." "Know what?" "That we're not prey," he said. "We never were." A transmission pulsed across the stars days later, a message sent from a hidden Zorak base, its source unknown. "We underestimated them. We called them primitive, weak, emotional. But they are none of these things. They are dangerous because they hope. They are terrifying because they endure. And they are unstoppable because they fight together." The galaxy listened. And for the first time in living memory, the Dominion hesitated. Epilogue: The Hidden Edge. Years later, historians would debate how humanity, outnumbered, outgunned, dismissed as irrelevant, had turned the tide of the greatest war in galactic history. Some said it was their adaptability, others their compassion, still others their relentless innovation. But those who had stood beside them knew the truth. Humanity's hidden edge was never their weapons. It wasn't their ships, or their strategies, or even their courage. It was their refusal to accept the impossible. It was their belief, unshakable, defiant, that tomorrow could be better. And for that reason alone, they were and always would be masters of war,